Have you ever wondered what truly happens in his mind when you finally walk away? Not the stories he tells others, not the mask he wears to look unaffected, but the quiet truth that unfolds when your energy is no longer there? At first, he convinces himself it's nothing. He tells himself you'll come back, because you always have. He scrolls through his phone, half expecting your name to light up the screen, and when it doesn't, he dismisses it. He fills the silence with noise, with distractions, with anything that spares him from admitting that something has shifted. But deep down, there's a discomfort he can't explain, a heaviness in his chest that lingers in the background, like a shadow he doesn't want to face. He notices the absence of your presence in subtle ways. The morning feels quieter, the evenings longer, and even in the company of others, there's an invisible emptiness he can't shake. You see, when you walked away, you didn't just remove your body from his world. You withdrew your energy, your devotion, your unwavering softness that held him in ways he didn't even realize. And while he may not admit it out loud, his soul registers the loss before his mind ever does. What he thinks in those first days is not what he says. On the surface, he tells himself he's fine, that he's free, that maybe this was for the best. But underneath, a different dialogue begins to stir. A quiet recognition that the very love he once assumed would always be there has suddenly vanished. This is the beginning of his reckoning, not with you, but with himself. Because what he feels in your absence is not punishment. It is the truth, finally unwrapped. At first, he mistakes your silence for space. He tells himself you simply need time, that eventually you'll reach out, that the rhythm you always shared will return. But as the days stretch on, he begins to feel it, not as something loud, but as something missing. Like the warmth of sunlight on a winter morning that suddenly hides behind clouds. He doesn't think of it as you're leaving. He feels it as a disconnection from something sacred, something that used to meet him quietly in the background of his life. Your presence was never dramatic, never demanding, and that's exactly why its absence now feels so haunting. What runs through his mind isn't regret at first, it's disbelief. He replays conversations, searches for signs, wonders when exactly the shift began. He scrolls through old messages, not to respond, but to remember what it felt like when you were still there. And the more he looks, the more he realizes he had mistaken your consistency for permanence. This thought unnerves him, because now, in the silence you've left, there is no cushion, no unseen safety net. He thought you would always wait, always bend, always forgive. But what he is coming to understand is that you never stayed because you needed him. You stayed because you chose him. And now that choice has dissolved back into you. The echo of your absence is not just quiet, it is instructive. It mirrors back to him everything he overlooked, everything he delayed, everything he failed to meet in you. And though he might not say it out loud, inside he begins to whisper the question he once avoided. What if she's not coming back this time? At first, he distracts himself. He dives into work, into friends, into anything that will drown out the growing void inside him. He tells himself you're still out there, still tethered to him somehow. But denial has a fragile shell, and slowly it begins to crack. The truth doesn't arrive with a crash, it creeps in. A late-night scroll through old photos. A song that suddenly feels like a memory instead of background noise. A quiet moment when his mind drifts, and instead of your presence, there's only emptiness. And in that silence, he feels it. Not anger, not rejection, but loss. This is when realization sets in. You are gone, not in anger, but in truth. He senses the difference now. You haven't left to punish him. You have risen to protect yourself. And for the first time, he begins to understand the weight of what that means. He thinks back on the countless moments he delayed, the times he assumed you'd wait forever, the times he met your devotion with half-hearted presence. And now, Those moments play back in sharp detail. They're no longer just memories, they're mirrors. Each one shows him the reflection of a man who was given sacred love and chose not to hold it. And so the silence becomes louder than words ever could. It presses on him, not with cruelty, but with clarity. He begins to see what he once dismissed as ordinary was, in truth, extraordinary. And now it is no longer his. In this breaking point, his thoughts shift from denial to recognition. He doesn't just miss you. He begins to recognize what you were all along. A force, a presence, a choice. And the weight of losing that is not something he can escape, no matter how hard he tries. By now, the silence isn't just around him, it's inside him. He feels it in the mornings when he wakes and instinctively reaches for a message that isn't there. He feels it at night when the world grows quiet, and there is nothing left to distract him from the hollow space where your presence used to live. Regret starts to bleed into his thoughts, not in a sudden flood, but in steady drops that wear him down. He remembers the way you laughed at small things, the way you checked in on him when he barely gave you anything to hold on to. He remembers how your love showed up in the simplest gestures, the ones he brushed aside as though they'd always be there. And now, those memories don't comfort him. They ache. They arrive uninvited, lingering like ghosts that refuse to leave. He scrolls through his phone, staring at your name, not with the courage to call, but with the hunger to feel close to you again, even if only through a thread of old words. What he thinks now isn't pride, and it isn't freedom. It's a sharp awareness of everything he let slip through his fingers. He wonders if you think of him at all, if your silence is heavy like his, or if you've already moved into a peace he can't reach. The thought unsettles him, because for the first time, he realizes you may not be longing the way he is. Every corner of his world now reflects your absence. The places you went together, the songs you once shared, even the way the air feels in certain rooms, it all carries an echo of you. And in those echoes, regret grows. Not because you punished him, but because he punished himself by not valuing you when he had the chance. And so he carries the ache, quietly, endlessly. A reminder that love isn't guaranteed, that devotion isn't permanent, that presence isn't promised. You were all of these things until you weren't. And now he lives inside the silence he once ignored. Regret, when it lingers long enough, stops being just pain. It becomes a mirror. And that's what your absence now offers him. A reflection he can't escape. For so long, he thought your love was a cushion, something soft enough to catch his mistakes, patient enough to wait through his silences, forgiving enough to absorb his absence. But now, with nothing left to fall back on, he sees himself without the buffer of your devotion. What he thinks in these moments isn't simple longing, it's recognition. He begins to notice the patterns he never wanted to face. The way he delayed instead of decided. The way he avoided instead of opened. The way he mistook your softness for surrender, your patience for dependence. And each realization cuts deeper than any goodbye ever could. Your silence no longer feels like distance. It feels like truth. And in that truth, he hears everything you never said out loud. I cannot carry both of us. I cannot wait forever. I cannot shrink myself just to fit your lack of presence. This awakening is not gentle. It rattles him. Because he realizes it wasn't you who left him behind. It was him who failed to rise. And now, your absence doesn't just remind him of what he's lost. It forces him to confront who he became while you were still there. A man who was loved deeply and yet remained asleep. What he thinks now isn't just about you. It's about himself. The version of him that hid, delayed, denied. He can see it clearly for the first time. And it terrifies him, because he knows that even if you were to return, nothing could erase the truth of who he was when he still had you. This is the beginning of his awakening. Not because you stayed, but because you left. Not through your words, but through your silence. And it is in this silence that he finally begins to meet the man he was always meant to be. Every reckoning leads to a choice. And now, as your absence continues to echo, he finds himself standing at a crossroads he can no longer ignore. One path is familiar, the path of denial, distraction, and delay. The same cycle that cost him your presence in the first place. If he chooses this road again, he knows what awaits him. Temporary comfort, shallow connections, fleeting escapes that never quiet the ache. But this time, he can no longer fool himself into believing it will be enough. Because once he has tasted what it feels like to lose you, nothing else can compare. The other path is harder. It asks him to face himself fully, to strip away the defenses he's hidden behind for years. It demands honesty, accountability, and growth. It requires him to sit with the uncomfortable truth that he wasn't the partner your love deserved. And more than that, it requires him to finally step into the man he always pretended he was becoming. This is the choice that keeps him awake at night. He wonders, do I let this pain crush me, or do I let it carve me into something new? Do I stay the man who only realized her worth after she walked away? Or do I rise into the man who never again mistakes love for permanence? What he thinks now isn't simple regret. It's a recognition of the power of choice. For the first time, he understands that your absence isn't a punishment, but an invitation. An invitation to grow, to evolve, to honor the sacredness of what was lost by finally becoming someone who can hold what is real. And though he doesn't know yet which road he will take, he feels the weight of this decision pressing on his chest. Because deep down, he knows this. Your absence has given him a mirror, but it will be his choice that determines whether he remains broken in its reflection or rises transformed by its truth. Growth is never promised a reward. And this is the thought that begins to haunt him as he wrestles with his awakening. Even if he chooses the harder path, even if he grows, changes, rises, he knows it may already be too late. This realization doesn't come with anger toward you. Instead, it comes as a deep, aching humility. For the first time, he understands that love is not a guarantee, that devotion has an expiration when it is not nourished, and that once someone remembers their worth, they rarely return to the place where it was once forgotten. He pictures himself transformed, more present, more awake, more alive. But when he imagines offering this version of himself to you, another thought pierces through. She may never see it. She may never want it. She may already be gone beyond my reach. And this, more than anything, is what humbles him. Because he begins to realize that his growth cannot be for you. It must be for himself. Your absence has forced him to understand a truth he long avoided. No one is entitled to another's love, no matter how much regret they carry. What he thinks now is heavy, but it is also honest. He wonders what it would have been like if he had awakened sooner, if he had seen your worth while you were still there. He replays moments in his mind, not to punish himself, but to understand just how much of his own fear cost him the love he now aches for. And though this realization burns, it also reshapes him. Because for the first time, he understands the sacred weight of presence. He knows that love must be tended, honored, and held in the now, not postponed, not assumed, not taken for granted. This haunting truth becomes his teacher. Even if you never return, your absence has carved into him the deepest lesson of all. To love fully, one must first show up fully. And that is something he can no longer ignore. As the silence deepens, he begins to imagine you, not in longing, not in fantasy, but in truth. He sees you now not as the woman who waited, but as the woman who rose. And this vision unsettles him, because for the first time, he realizes your life no longer circles around him at all. He thinks of you laughing again, but not with him. He imagines you choosing yourself in ways he never encouraged you to. He envisions your energy no longer pouring into someone who couldn't meet it, but flowing back into your own becoming. And in that image, he feels both pride and pain. Pride, because your strength is undeniable. Pain, because he knows he never deserved to be the one who dimmed it. Your sovereignty haunts him, not as a punishment, but as proof that he was never the source of your light. You were, always. And now, in reclaiming yourself, you've proven a truth he long refused to face. You didn't need him, you chose him. That choice is gone now, dissolved into your own alignment, and that reality forces him into humility. What he thinks when he imagines you now is no longer rooted in entitlement. He no longer assumes you'll come back. Instead, he wonders if you've already stepped so fully into your own power that his memory has become just that, a shadow, a faint echo of a life you no longer resonate with. And this thought, though painful, awakens something sacred in him. For the first time, he sees you not as an extension of his story, but as the author of your own. He realizes your rising was never about leaving him. It was about returning to yourself. This is the paradox that now lives in his chest. He aches for you, but he also reveres you. And in that reverence, he finally begins to grasp what love actually is. Not possession, not control, not waiting for someone to come back, but honoring their freedom, even when it breaks you open. Change rarely arrives in thunder. More often, it slips in like a tide, reshaping the shore grain by grain. That's how your absence works on him. Quietly, persistently, without fanfare. At first, he resists. He wants to believe he can move on untouched. But the longer he lives without your presence, the more he realizes he cannot return to who he was before. Something in him has shifted, and it refuses to be undone. He begins to think differently, not just about you, but about himself, about love, about the kind of man he's been. He notices the patterns he used to excuse. He feels the weight of his own avoidance. He sees the ways he mistook patience for permanence. These thoughts, once buried under distraction, now rise with clarity he cannot ignore. And slowly, a transformation takes root. He starts listening more closely, not only to others, but to himself. He begins showing up where he once disappeared. He catches himself before slipping back into the old reflex of delay. These changes aren't dramatic. They're quiet, subtle shifts, but they matter, because they mark the difference between the man he was and the man he is becoming. What he thinks in these moments is not that change will win you back, but that change is the only way forward. For the first time, he isn't chasing your love, he's chasing his own wholeness. And that distinction matters, because it means your absence has given him the gift of accountability. He may never say it aloud, but he knows it took losing you to find himself. And though the ache of that truth never fully leaves him, it also fuels him. Because he doesn't just want to be the man who regrets. He wants to be the man who grows. And so, step by step, in the silence you left behind, he begins to transform. Not for you, not even because of you, but because your absence finally showed him what presence really means. There comes a point when even the deepest ache softens, not because it disappears, but because it becomes woven into who you are. That's where he finds himself now. Your absence no longer feels like a fresh wound. It feels like a scar, tender but instructive, a reminder of a love he once held and the cost of not honoring it. What he thinks in these moments is quieter than before. The storm of denial, the sharp pangs of regret, the restless longing, they've all settled into something steadier. Acceptance. He knows now that your choice was not against him, but for yourself. And in that truth, he finds a strange kind of peace. He doesn't wait for your return anymore. He no longer builds secret hopes around the thought of you reaching back. Instead, he lets the silence teach him. He learns that love cannot survive on assumptions, that devotion cannot be sustained by one heart alone, and that the sacred feminine cannot be held by a man who refuses to rise beside her. Your memory is still with him, but it no longer breaks him. It guides him. When he feels the temptation to retreat into old patterns, he remembers the echo of your absence and chooses differently. When he feels the urge to delay, to dismiss, to take for granted, he remembers what delay cost him once before. This is how your absence lives in him now, not as punishment, but as wisdom. He carries the ache with grace, understanding that it will never fully leave him, and perhaps it shouldn't, because it is this ache that keeps him honest, awake, and alive to the truth he once ignored. And though he may never tell you, he whispers it to himself in quiet moments. She changed me, not by staying, but by leaving. Not by pleading, but by rising. And though I lost her, I found myself. In the end, what he thinks is simple, though it took him so long to arrive here. Love was never about having. It was about holding. About showing up fully, not someday, not almost, but now. And when he failed to do that, he lost the one thing he thought would always remain. He doesn't frame your absence as betrayal anymore. He doesn't call it unfair or cruel. He sees it now for what it always was, a sacred turning point. Not just for you, but for him. Because in walking away, you reminded him of a truth he had forgotten. Love is a choice, not a guarantee. A flame that must be tended, not assumed. A presence that must be honored, not postponed. What he carries now is not just regret. It is reverence. Reverence for the way you loved him, for the softness you gave, for the patience you embodied. Reverence for the courage it took to rise when waiting became too heavy. And reverence for the way your absence reshaped him more than your presence ever could. This is his quiet confession, the one he may never say aloud. I thought she would always be there. I thought her love was permanent. I thought wrong. And in that truth lies his greatest transformation. Because though he lost you, he gained a mirror that will never fade. And every time he looks into it, he sees not just the man who failed to meet your love, but the man who finally learned what it means to hold love with both hands, without hesitation, without delay. So if you've ever wondered what he thinks when you walk away, know this: he doesn't just think of you. He thinks of himself, of the man he was when you still waited, and the man he is becoming now that you no longer do. And though he may never speak it, his soul will always carry the truth. Your absence was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of his awakening. And now it's your turn. If this message spoke to your soul, affirm it in the comments with the words, "My silence is sacred." Let it anchor your truth. Like this video if you feel its power. Share it with the women who need to hear they are worthy of love that shows up. And subscribe, because here, you will always find reminders of your light, your sovereignty, and your sacred worth. Your absence was never emptiness, it was alignment. And your rising is not just a goodbye, but a new beginning. For you, for him, for the truth of love itself.